This Sunday is a beautiful Sunday, and there's many names that this Sunday tends to be called. Laetare Sunday, Refreshment Sunday, Mid-Lent Sunday, all kinds of names. So I thought for my homily I would just talk about really four names that have become traditional names for what we celebrate today, and what might be a thread to kind of tie them all together. So the first name for this Sunday is Refreshment Sunday, which means that traditionally this would be a day where Catholics could break their fast, right? If they had been fasting for Lent, they could receive refreshment today. They were freed from their fasting and they could eat normal food. And we forget that for us as modern Catholics, we tend to give up rather quaint things for Lent, right? We say, I'm giving up TikTok, or I'm giving up chocolate or coffee, right? But for a medieval Christian, Lent meant serious fasting. And so they gave up all kinds of sweets. They gave up all meat products. So there was no meat, there was no eggs, there was no cheese, no milk. They essentially lived like vegans for 40 days, which I know is very trendy, especially in cities like Sedona. But we have to remember that in the Middle Ages, right, they didn't have modern food distribution, so they weren't exactly having like avocado toast. And they hadn't yet discovered the New World, so they didn't have potatoes, they didn't have corn, they didn't have tomatoes, they didn't have a lot of really sustenance food. And so for a medieval Christian to live as a vegan meant, honestly, quite a bit of sacrifice. If they would have been eating the food they had in the area, it would have meant a lot of beans and sprouts and pretty boring food for 40 days. And so to be able on this day to break their fast would have been literal refreshment. They would have, thanked God to be able to eat meat, to eat eggs, actually kind of get some good nutrients in their body because they were genuinely fasting during the time of Lent. So that's our first title, is Refreshment Sunday. The church is telling us, hey, take a break, right? We're right in the middle of Lent. We don't have to, this is a marathon, it's not a sprint. Have a little bit of refreshment. Our second title is Laetare Sunday, which comes from the traditional Gregorian chant that begins this Mass. Every single Mass of the whole year has their own Gregorian chant, and ours begins with the word Laetare. It says, Laetare Jerusalem. In English, the whole antiphon is, Rejoice, Jerusalem, all you who love her. Be joyful, all you who were in mourning. Exult, and be satisfied at her consoling breast. This is a quotation from the book of Isaiah, chapter 66. And this quotation comes from a large section of the book of Isaiah that would have been encouraging the exiles as they were returning from Babylon. So this part of the book of Isaiah is describing, prophesying, and speaking about the joy of God's people leaving Babylon, leaving their exile, and returning home to Israel. And so what it does is it calls to mind that every year, faithful Jews would travel to Jerusalem to the temple, right? They would recreate the return from Babylon. They would recreate the return from Egypt. And as they entered into the holy city, they would sing songs of joy, and they would encourage each other with psalms and with hymns, singing on their way to the holy city. So as we, as faithful Catholics, right, travel through Lent, as we approach that definitive and perfect return from exile, that return from slavery to sin at Easter, we encourage ourselves on the way, right? And so the church, we're singing joyful songs, singing psalms and hymns, as we too approach more and more closely our return home, our return to the holy city, to the temple of Jerusalem. So that's Laetare Sunday. Our third title for this Sunday is Mothering Sunday. And what Mothering Sunday is that in especially the British Isles, so in Ireland and England and in a lot of the medieval British Isles, this was a day traditionally where Christians would return to the church of their baptism. So as our entrance antiphon describes Jerusalem as a mother, right? That we can be satisfied at her consoling breast. So all Christians would return to their mother church. They would go back to the church of their baptism and have this triumphal entry, and they process in. And oftentimes it would be the cathedral of their diocese. So back in the Middle Ages, everybody was baptized at the cathedral, not at their home parish. They had to go to the bishop. So what would happen on this day, on Mothering Sunday, is all the different parishes, all the different groups would go and journey together to their mother church. And they would all triumphantly process in to the cathedral and have a big giant mass to celebrate their mother at which they were baptized. And authors of the time tell us that it was so popular that different parish groups would fight over who could get into the church first and who would be in what order, and different altar guilds would try, there would be like physical fights trying to get into the church, which tells you that very little changes in Catholic life, right? We love to fight. We love to fight. So that's our third image of Mothering Sunday, is that just like the ancient Jews traveling to the temple to return to their mother and their home, so Christians would return to their mother church and rejoice in their baptism, and travel and return home to their mother. Our fourth and final title for this morning is Rose Sunday. And the obvious allusion is that the vestments at Mass are rose-colored, they're pink. But that's actually not exactly what it's talking about. And what the title Rose Sunday refers to is the golden rose, which is an ancient tradition of the popes. We have testimony of this tradition existing in the 11th century, and even in the 11th century, it was so old that they even said, we don't know when it started. We have no clue how long we've been doing this as Catholics. It is like that ancient. And what it is the Pope would go to a specific church in Rome. So he would go to the church of Santa Croce in Gerusalemme, which is the church in Rome that has the relics of the true cross. So the Pope would go and offer Mass at the relics of the true cross, and then at the end of Mass, he would emerge from the church triumphant, and he would hold a golden rose as a sign that from the cross, even still comes joy, and from the stump of Jesse, a bud shall blossom, right? And even among the thorns, there's the joy of the rose. So even during Lent, there's joy. So he would emerge from the church of the cross holding a golden rose, and then all the people of Rome would line the broad avenue, and the Pope would process down the avenue holding the rose, and he'd be blessing people like a nice little Pope. And so he'd walk down to his main church, and he would offer a triumphant Mass. And over time, like all good things Catholic, it got bigger and better as things went on. So the rose got heavier and heavier and heavier, and we have history tells us that the rose at one point weighed 20 pounds of pure gold, and it was given to the Queen of France. So he had to have somebody carry, so he had one of his priests kind of carry the rose in front of him. He's kind of blessing people. It was just over the top, totally over the top. So then the Pope would process with his golden rose into his cathedral church, offer a triumphant Mass, and then at the end of the ceremonies, he would give the rose either to the Holy Roman Emperor, or he would give the rose to his favorite Catholic monarch of the year. So it was like the Pope's Employee of the Year award. He'd give the golden rose of you're my favorite king this year, you're my favorite queen this year. And this, again, is so ancient, we literally do not know when this started. Right? And so we have testimony that it was given to the last male was in the 1700s to the Doge of Venice, the Duke of Venice. And then it kind of stopped after that because I think they figured out that the idea of the Pope giving a king a nice, pretty rose wasn't really very manly. So it kind of over time transitioned into a very feminine gift. And so every year the Pope would give the golden rose to his favorite queen or princess. And the last time it was given to a princess was in the year 1956. It was given to the Princess of Luxembourg. And then after that, the popes kind of, said, well, we don't really have any monarchs anymore. It really isn't a thing to do. And so now what the popes do is every time they visit a Marian shrine or a Marian church, they give the golden rose to Mary at the church as a sign that Mary is our true queen and our true mother. And so even Pope Francis has given the golden rose, I think 5 or 6 or 7 times, several times, and each time to a different Marian church as he's visited, that Mary is his favorite queen, right? And I think it's a beautiful, beautiful tradition. And I think it's in Mary, actually, that all these titles get pulled together. That Mary is, after all, the perfect temple, right? As Jews would have traveled to go to their home, their temple, that just as the temple was a place where God's presence, right, dwelt in the Holy of Holies, so Mary, right, in her very womb, carried the Holy of Holies, that she carried God's presence on earth. Mary is the perfect temple. That just as Christians sought refreshment on this day, right, Mary is our refreshment, our solace, our support in this life. That even at the foot of the cross, Mary is there with us, right? She never abandons us. And Mary is our refreshment as Christians. That even amidst our fasts, our emptiness, our brokenness, and our sin, we can always go to her for comfort and always go to her for support. Mary is our true queen, right? That Mary always leads us to her son, the king, and she knows exactly who's in charge. And time after time again, she brings us right to him. And she is queen of heaven and earth, of angels and saints, of all things, right? Because our Lord, out of his love for her, crowns her as such. And we, as her sons and daughters, as her people, can love her with such affection, right? Because she is our true and everlasting queen. And she is the true rejoicer, right? As we rejoice on Laetare Sunday, she's the only person who can stand at the cross and rejoice, because she's the only one who knows and believes that he will rise from the dead, right? Mary alone can stand at the cross and rejoice, because through her faith, she knows what's coming next. And she can encourage, and as I'm sure she did, right? John and the other women, and console them and support them and help them, even in the midst of that darkness and sadness, to rejoice, because she knows through her faith that our Lord will rise again. And so we can always turn to our Blessed Mother, who is faithful at the cross, even in this valley of tears. Because after all, right, what do the names Guadalupe or Lourdes or Fatima or Medjugorje or any of these titles mean but a mother who constantly draws close to her children, right? A queen who always cares for us, who offers us refreshment, care, and support at any point of our lives. And so this morning, Mary is our joy, right? We can rejoice that even at the cross, she's with us. And we can take great delight in knowing that she is our true queen, our true mother, who never abandons us and supports us in our sorrows and in our joys.